some reason, fascists, racists, homophobes, spousal abusers, and just overall pieces of human garbage are all drawn into the various combat sports. Boxing, kickboxing, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, and MMA are all full of them. Today I want to talk about this phenomenon a little bit. Maybe it's because they're obsessed with Roman combat. It could be it's repressed homoerotic behavior. Maybe they view violence as a way to manifest an ultimate display of masculinity and power or dominance. Whatever the cause, combat sports are unfortunately rife with chuds. Every city has gyms full of douchebags, and some of them make it to the UFC and get semi-famous. Look to Sean Strickland as a perfect example of this. A possible reason that no one has ever checked is because combat sports thrive on drama and controversy. Without a story, fights unfortunately don't sell as well. Fight sports align with far-right values in a way that other sports don't, said Dr. Brian Hughes in an interview. Hughes is a professor at American University and director of Peril, an organization that researches extremism and radicalization. He goes on to say, far-right politics have always emphasized the importance of violence. Far-right philosophy valorizes violence as the pinnacle of being alive. And ironically, because combat sports are so diverse, they give racist far-right groups the ability to see violent racial conflict performed in miniature in the ring or octagon. Ramzan Kadyrov. Kadyrov is the Putin-loving, homophobic, and by homophobic I mean he rounded up, tortured, and disappeared gay men, dictator of Chechnya that also runs state MMA organization ACA, which absorbed ACB in 2018. He owns a soccer team in the Russian Premier League and a stable of prize-winning horses in the United Arab Emirates. You should also look into the Abdul Karim Edilov death, because I won't go into details for the sake of brevity, but it's a worthwhile story to look into. Now, besides the absorption of ACB into a state-run ACA, I want to bring up all the fighters associated with the UFC that have traveled to visit him. If I'm not mistaken, most, if not all of them, were given money to visit Kadyrov, but please correct me in the comments if I'm wrong about this. This list includes, but is not limited to, Khamzat Chimaev, who may have been forced out of retirement by Ramzan, Fabricio Verdum, who also uses homophobic slurs, Cody Garbrandt, Henry Cejudo, Justin Gaethje, who also lied about meeting his son, Kamaru Usman, who trained his sons, Frank Mir, Chris Weidman, Frankie Edgar, Renzo Gracie, and Khabib Nurmagomedov, who also laughed as he paid a homeless man to do push-ups. Dana White. Unshockingly, Dana White is known to be a huge piece of shit in the community. This is not news. However, I don't think most people view Dana as a full-on fascist, but I do. His words and actions over the decades raise an unreasonable amount of red flags, and I'm only going to scratch the surface here. If it's not transphobia, saying that Cyborg looks like Wanderlei Silva in a dress, it's cheating on or beating his wife. If it's not domestic violence, it's his disdain for paying his fighters. If it's not his shitty business practices, then it's his horrible political takes and affiliations. Not just him speaking at the Republican National Convention in favor of Donald Trump, but his open flirting with the America First crowd, who just happened to be a neo-fascist organization taking their logo from a U.S. Nazi rally in the 1940s. It's been known that Dana is the scum of the earth, but somehow he keeps getting away with it and doing or saying more and more fucked up shit, all the while amassing opulent sums of money. I imagine his fall into fascism has to do with his meteoric rise in income in the mid-2000s, paired with his close relationship to Trump. Once he became filthy rich, he stopped caring about anything else except retaining it at whatever cost. I would not be surprised if he gets a political position offer from Trump, and he would be a benevolent politician just as he is businessman. Tito Ortiz. A name you will see a ton in the video. Tito Ortiz is someone that has a history in MMA and especially the UFC. He began with the company in 1997 and became champion in 2000, where he held the belt until 2003. Tito was never known in the sport as the smartest guy and has fallen into meme territory since retiring. Since then, he has become a huge Trump opponent and fan of the proposed wall. He is also an anti-mask, anti-vax, Islamophobe, QAnon proponent, and staunch transphobe. Oh, and he thinks George Floyd wasn't murdered. The MMA community is unsure how much potential brain damage plays into all of this. The scariest thing is that he had a political career as a Republican, though it only lasted 7 months before he bowed out in disgrace. During his time in politics in Huntington Beach, he allowed a White Lives Matter KKK rally to happen. While a city council member, he filed an unemployment claim against the city, despite the fact that he continued to earn a council member stipend and expense allowance. Last I heard, his kids were constantly bullied for not masking, so he moved the family to Florida. Joe Rogan. He's not just the Fear Factor guy or the former voice of the UFC. He also has one of the most popular podcasts on the planet, where he has a long history of platforming fascists, racists, homophobes, transphobes, and conspiracy theorists. He even had J.D. Vance and Donald Trump on his podcast, then endorsed Trump full on. Rogan is also a vocal supporter of DeSantis and Abbott in their respective states. I could go on about the problematic guests he's had on, like Gavin McInnes or Milo Yiannopoulos, but I'll just leave it at that. If you don't know either of them, I suggest a quick Google. Anyway, Rogan was known to be progressive, but I think it was mostly his stance on recreational cannabis and universal basic income. I personally used to listen to him, but I never got the feeling he was very left-leaning, especially with his range of right-wing and conspiracy theorist guests. The Gracies. For the Gracie family, we'll focus on them as a whole, not just each individual. That would be a whole video in and of itself. Though, I will single out Enzo Gracie as maybe being the worst for his quoting and defending a Nazi. He also has a gym in Israel, promoted Kadyrov on Chechnya TV, and supports police murder. The Gracie family we know right now come from a small city in Scotland. Helio's father, Gustave, started the exploitative circus acts that include at least one in the U.S. It was through this that they met Mitsuyo Maeda, and, well, the rest is history. Helio admitted that he once targeted homosexual men and attacked them based on sexual preference. This was in Playboy in 2001. Speaking of sex, Helio went on to add, I can say that I've never had sex with a woman without the purpose of reproduction. I also taught that to my sons and various grandsons. None were F words. Helio was an avid proponent of women staying home with children. He also was a member of the fascist Brazilian movement integralism. This makes sense after you learn about the class struggle for poor Brazilians being forced to learn luta livre because they can't afford the fancy gi, and how the Gracies tried to snuff them out. Armed with this knowledge, one can see where the family's values began and why the newer generation like Ron Gracie is so out there with his wacky conspiracy theories, though it could also come from a full lifetime of training and accumulating CTE. Regardless, this family has a history of fascism, and barely anyone in the family has any pushback about it and continues to this day. Next, I'm going to lump a few things together because they all intersect in their spheres of right wing. We'll begin with the Trumpers and Bolsonaros and the people that fall into far-right politics. Some names may be surprising and others are probably not. These are just people that outwardly support the candidates. They don't lean much further right than that, according to what I could find. We'll move on to that next. Paulo Costa, Sean Strickland, Jose Aldo, Wanderlei Silva, Vitor Belfort, RDA, Daniel Cormier, Michael Chandler, John Jones, Royce Gracie, Stipe Miocic, Jacare Souza, Darren Till, Conor McGregor, who's also very anti-immigration and a nationalist, Colby Covington, Jorge Masvidal, Henry Cejudo, Justin Gaethje, Tito Ortiz, Chael Sonnen, Cowboy Cerrone, Tim Kennedy, Andrei Arlovsky, Nick Lentz, who shouted out rapist Brett Kavanaugh, and finally Rod Salka. He's a relatively unknown fighter that had America First and pro-wall rhetoric on his shorts. He was KO'd in that fight, though, hilariously. In addition to being a pro boxer, Salka ran as a Republican for a Pennsylvania House of Representatives seat in 2016, but lost to incumbent Democratic candidate Bill Quartz by a near 2-1 voting margin. Conspiracies. Next up in our Venn diagram are conspiracy theorists. This is a short list of people that believe in them, but not the specifics of what they believe. That could be a whole video in and of itself. Most of the conspiracies believed are harmful in some way, warranting them a spot on this list. Jake Shields, Eddie Bravo, Bryce Mitchell, Tim Kennedy, Pat Miletich, Jared Cannonier, Spike Carlisle, Randy Couture, Tito Ortiz, Rich Franklin, Josh Thompson, Brandon Vera, Uriah Faber, Ronda Rousey, Rashad Evans, Ben Askren, Kung Lee, Mike Winklejohn, BJ Penn, Ron Gracie. The last circle in our Venn diagram is a short list of the people that were at January 6th, are a QAnon believer, or a Stop the Steal believer. This is where we see some overlap on who's a full-on fascist and who is just a regular asshole. I could lump these people in with the conspiracy theorists, but I wanted to illustrate who really went off the deep end to believe this niche brand of garbage and not just general conspiracies. Tito Ortiz, Eddie Alvarez, Jorge Masvidal, Michael Chandler, Gina Carano, who is also a transphobe, Pat Miletich, Hector Lombard, Tara La Rosa. The intersection of these three circles is people like Tito Ortiz, Michael Chandler, Jorge Masvidal, and Pat Miletich. They have such disdain and disregard for anyone that doesn't think like them, and they're the scum of the earth. Bonus round, here are some Proud Boys associated with the MMA. Tara La Rosa, Mike Anchetta, and Jared Serby, based out of Australia. Cops in MMA. It seems to make perfect sense that cops are drawn to combat sports, especially Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and MMA. I'm sure some had good intentions when getting into combat sports, but the fact of the matter is, they only use these skills to oppress people, especially BIPOC citizens. This group has found small niche as referees as well. As seen in the first two entries, the rest of the list are current or former law enforcement. Special mention to John Jones for acting like a cop during the George Floyd uprising and protecting city and private property. Mike Beltran, John McCarthy, Jermaine Durandamy, Mirko Krokop, Chris Dawkins, Forrest Griffin, Marlon Moraes, Jimmy Rivera, Kay Hansen, Ashley Cummings, Donnie Aaron, who's also a Nazi, Johnny Hendricks, and Trevin Giles. Domestic violence. Speaking of police, combat sports are rife with domestic abusers. This is another example of literal human garbage that is still somehow allowed to exist in the MMA and greater combat sports circle. Some of the people listed have been arrested and are currently incarcerated because of their crimes. Others have slipped through the cracks and are still associated with the UFC or are fan favorites. John Jones is, at the time of this recording, still the UFC heavyweight champion. I think that the bridge between these monsters could be ingrained misogyny and patriarchy, corollary with toxic masculinity and twisted ideas of strength, domination, and manhood. Phil Baroni, John War Machine Copenhaver, Greg Hardy, John Jones, Anthony Johnson, Donnie Aaron, Rachel Ostovich's ex-husband Arnold Burden, Nick Lentz, Matt Hughes, Mike Perry, and Rampage Jackson. Lastly, I want to briefly touch on Nazi fight groups like active clubs. Fascists are constantly organizing and training combat sports and holding events where they have friendly competitions with each other. This isn't a new phenomenon. However, now it's much easier to identify these chuds. While most people pay them no mind, I think it's important to inform you of their existence. They are training to be a fascist street gang for Trump and his political goons. These active clubs are not workout sessions for losers. Okay, well, they actually are, but they also are groups actively and aggressively recruiting anyone white into their ranks. But don't get it twisted. They are Nazis and need to be dealt with accordingly. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was as informative for you to watch as it was for me to research, as I just wanted to briefly touch on everything I could substantially bring information to. If this is something you'd like to see more of on the channel, let me know in the comments below.